Good early morning, everybody. It's a little bit past midnight here, live from Southwest Pennsylvania on Spreaker Web Radio. You're listening to another live podcast of Real Steel Sports with your host, the incomparable, the immeasurable, the infinite, James Krisnerick. Last night, I did 4 different segments breaking down each of the four different brackets of NFL.com's quarterback bracketology. In the right now bracket, I have Tom Brady beating Peyton Manning to represent the best quarterback from the right now era in the Final Four. From the Generation X, I have Joe Montana, who bested John Elway, Brett Favre, who bested Steve Young, and John Unitas, who bested Terry Bradshaw. All right, so now we're down to the Final Four. And the matchup in the left half of the bracket features Joe Montana versus Tom Brady. Now, Joe Theismann has maintained that Tom Brady is now the greatest quarterback of all time. He maintains that over Joe Montana, and I'm not really sure because their numbers are comparable at this point in their career. If you were to look at the numbers that they've put up in their careers. Hang on, loading up the statistics right now. Let's see, where's pass? Okay, here's passer rating. Okay, I have the 6 categories: completions, attempts, yards, touchdowns, percentage, and ratings. Now, let's start with passes completed. Tom Brady's completed 4,178 passes compared to Joe Montana's 3,409. That's due in large part to the fact that Brady's thrown a lot more passes in his career. And it shows. In the attempts category, Tom Brady has over 1,300 more passing, almost 1,300 more passing attempts than Joe Montana does. So he's thrown the ball a lot more. In terms of yardage, Brady leads him by almost 10,000 yards. Passing touchdowns, Brady has a 359 to 273 lead on him. Completion percentage, Brady's been very, very good in his career, and he barely beats Montana in this category, beating him 63.4% to 63.2%. And passer rating, Tom Brady's passer rating is 95.7 and Montana's 92.3. So there's the statistical breakdown right there. I just wanted to do it for that matchup. I won't be doing it for the other matchup because you can't really compare Unitas' stats to Brett Favre's because of the fact that the numbers are so different. But I digress. Anyways, the more you think about it between these two, they're really each other from each other's, generation. The Montana generation had the clutch guy that won the Super Bowls, that was always in the big games. And in the 2000s and early 2010s, that was Brady for us, and Joe Montana was back in the 80s and 90s, I will be perfectly honest and say I think this is a very close matchup, but if I had to give an edge somewhere, it's to Joe Montana, because Joe Montana, if you look at the biggest drives of Brady's career, most of them culminated with Adam Vinatieri kicking a field goal for the win. Joe Montana's drives, a little bit more sizzle. And I think the fact that, if you look at career game-winning drives and comebacks, game-winning drives, Brady has 42, Montana's got 33. Fourth quarter comebacks, Brady has 31 and Montana has 31. So they're even. But when you want to talk about the two quarterbacks, you have to realize something. It's that Joe Montana had Jerry Rice and John Taylor his whole career, more or less. And before that, he had Dwight Clark and Freddie Solomon, which weren't bad receivers. And then he had Russ Francis for a while, was very good. He had, in addition to those guys, He had Brent Jones, who was a very, very talented, very, very solid tight end. So, and Roger Craig out of the backfield. He had all kind of weapons. And Brady, for the first 5, 6, 7 years of his career, didn't have any more than Troy Brown, Jabbar Gaffney, Deion Branch, David Givens, David Patton. Average guys. But when you give him the tools, Randy Moss, who's not as good as Jerry Rice, you give him Wes Welker, who's not as good as John Taylor, and you give him that one year they had Benjamin Watson, who's not as good as Brent Jones, and Brady throws 50 touchdown passes, goes 18-0. What does that tell you? You give Brady the tools so he can be the best of all time. But here's the thing. Comparing him to Montana is very, very tough because of the fact that Montana is just so legendary in NFL history, and the fact that, 4-0, undefeated in Super Bowls. Meanwhile, Tom Brady, 3-2, lost a couple of games that he could have won. He could have beaten the Giants both times. He really could have. And a host of AFC title games. Let's look at them. They blew the 18-point lead in this first half against the Colts in 2006. In 2010, the number one seed, 8 straight wins, best offensive football, best turnover differential, hadn't committed turnover in a month and a half, 2 months. Brady throws 4 picks, I believe it's the third best or second best pass interception percentage in a season, in a single season. It's now been knocked down to number 4 at 0.8% of his passes. They get beaten by the Jets in the first round of playoffs in a game that was 28-21, but wasn't even that close. 2012 and 2013, they fall in the AFC title game to teams that they're better than. The Ravens the one year. And the Broncos, maybe not so much, even though they did beat the Broncos in the regular season. So yeah, and with Montana, more or less when his teams lost the playoffs, it wasn't by really his own fault. It was more or less a factor of, you look at the game against the Giants in '86, they got blown out. The defense gave it up, and he got popped early in the game, and he was out for the game. Then you look at the 1983 team, the bad call against the Redskins. The 85 team ended up losing to the Giants, and the 1990 team, which ended up falling to the Giants, and then in 1987 losing to the Vikings, and was one of the most embarrassing performances of his career. But what I think needs to be said about Montana is he's had fewer in-game collapses. He's had fewer times in his career where he's been the reason his team lost. He is the most, you look at it, he's so complete as a quarterback. And if you have to give the one edge to Montana that he has, that Tom Brady doesn't, it's the fact that whenever the big moment called for it, Montana always stepped up. And Brady has fallen short at times. I mean, if you look at Tom Brady in the postseason, from 2001 to 2007, he went 14-3 in the playoffs. And since then, 4-5. So he's fizzled out in a way in the playoffs. He's not had the good postseasons over the last years. He used to have early in his career. His numbers are going up. But he's having more games now, like he's done against the Ravens. A pick, a touchdown, 2 or 3 picks, completing less than 60% of his passes. He's been going downhill. Joe Montana, on the other hand, I don't think there's much of an argument there that even later in his career in the postseason, he still got it. And his last year in Kansas City, an undermanned Chiefs team took on the 49ers at home. The same 49ers team that MVP Steve Young would lead to a Super Bowl that season in a complete destruction of the Chargers, a team that beat out the Chiefs in the division race. And they beat them bad. He had that fire. He had that competitive fire. He always had it. And I think in this semifinal bout, by the skews of his teeth, Joe Montana takes out Tom Brady. Now, the other semifinal features Johnny Unitas and Brett Favre. Now, comparing these two by numbers is absolutely useless because the only statistics that you're going to find Johnny Unitas on the top 5 of anything, once it loads, is that he's number 9 in passing touchdowns. Brett Favre's number 1. He's got literally, if Favre would have thrown another 72 touchdowns, he would have twice as many careers as Unitas did. But he played a lot longer. He played longer, missed fewer games with injuries, obviously because of his streak, and he threw so much more. Pass completion percentage. Brett Favre, 62% of his passes. You scroll all the way down to John Unitas, 54.6. That is incredible. That's like 70% today, considering back then all the rules that were in place about pass interference that did not exist. You could literally tackle the receiver up and down the sideline, and you wouldn't get called for it. Passing yards. Unitas is 14th with 4,239. Favre is first with over 70,000. Pass career attempts. Brett Favre is 10,000 career attempts. John Unitas 17 is 5,186, almost half as many. Completions. Brett Favre 6,300 completions exactly on the dot. Unitas 2,830. And passer rating. Brett Favre is the 18th ranked passer of all time at 86.0. And you scroll down the list for John Unitas, 78.2. There you go. So you look at those numbers, it's almost pointless. You kind of really have to go along with their impact and what they did and how they played in the big moments. When I think of Johnny Unitas, I remember the quote by one of the Baltimore sports writers on an NFL Top 10 episode. It was Clutch Quarterbacks. They ranked Unitas number 5, and on my list, I'd probably move him up a place or two. The games in Baltimore, when Unitas played there, used to start at 2 o'clock. And they did that only in Baltimore because it wanted to give everybody time to go to church. Now, I'm not a religious person. But the thing was, Sunday started with God and ended with God. And God has only one place, that's number 1. And as a quarterback, Unitas was as close to God as we've ever seen, because look at all the stuff Montana, Marino, Elway, Bradshaw, Namath, Starr, all those guys were doing their career in terms of their routes, in terms of concepts, in terms of their drops in the pocket, the play calling. A lot of that can be derived from Unitas. He was really the father of the position. Brett Favre, on the other hand, has given us so many memorable moments. Whether it was beating his addiction of Vicodin and winning a Super Bowl that year and having his best season ever with 39 touchdowns, 3 straight MVP seasons, a season in 2009 where he led the Vikings so close to the Super Bowl, which I think they'd have beaten the Colts if they'd gotten a chance, and had an immeasurably good year for the Minnesota Vikings that year. I mean, you look at what he did that year. His 11th Pro Bowl, at the age of 40, completing over 68% of his passes, which was a personal best for him. The third most yards he ever threw for. Oh, and let's not forget his pass rating was higher than ever, almost 10 points higher than his previous best. So Favre got so good at the end of his career, those 4 or 5 years he had at the end with Green Bay and the Minnesota years, and then a couple of Green Bay years in there, he was really good. And people don't give him enough credit for that, is that people are so quick when they talk about the greatest quarterbacks of all time to leave him out. But Brett Favre could play as good as any. You just have to rein him in. And when Holmgren had semi-control over him and had him reined in, those are the best years Favre ever had, was with Mike Holmgren. So if you're looking to put together a team and you want Favre as your quarterback and you put Holmgren as your head coach, you're going to be succeeding because of how well Brett Favre ran the West Coast offense. He took what Montana was doing in San Francisco and took it to another level, considering he was having seasons that were immensely prolific compared to Joe's. Now, in comparison to Unitas, this is where I think the comparison falls short, because in the big games, Favre sometimes wouldn't throw the right pass at the right time. Look at the game in 2001 against the Rams. He threw 6 picks in one game. Look at the game against the Giants in 2007 in the NFC title game. Threw the pick at the end to Corey Webster to seal his fate in his last pass to Packer. The Jets, the last 4 or 5 games against the Dolphins. You got to excuse that because of his torn